mistakes.
Okay. Well, next when we're out there, actually, whatever the next royal event is covering, I'll hold you to taking me there. Have a listen to this.
Escort. They are, of course, mounted. We'll also have the pipes and drums of the Scots and Irish Guards. And the Coldstream Guards, as you see, are flanking the state hearse. And again, we've gone back to that very slow march, because this now is, as I was saying, it's the equivalent, but on a much smaller scale, of what we had in London when Her Majesty was taken from the Great Hall at Westminster into Westminster Abbey, with the pipes and the drums and the bands and the sailors and the marching soldiers. This is the sort of funeral that perhaps Queen Victoria would have had, that her father, King George VI, would have had, her grandfather, King George V, because they had their funeral services in the St. George's Chapel. and not here in Westminster Abbey.
And what a beautiful contrast also, Angela, now just seeing all of that pageantry which filled the streets of London, now filling the English countryside.
Absolutely. And again it is, something the Queen planned. She wanted almost a two-part funeral. We've had the pomp and ceremony in London, and now we've got, if you like, a country funeral in a way. The country funeral for the monarch. She was a country woman, remember. She loved her horses and her dogs. She loved being in the country. And I think one of the reasons why she found Windsor such a beautiful place to call home was because she had Windsor Great Park on her doorstep. She was able to ride her horses there, just in the headscarf, very often out without any kind of pomp and ceremony, and very often, I suspect, with very, very discreet police that were just making sure that the Queen wasn't bothered, if you like. But she used to stop and talk to people while she was in the park, when she was walking her dogs, when she was riding her horses. And there you see Windsor Castle outlined against the sky at the start of, once again, the King's Royal Horse Artillery giving the gun salute as Her Majesty comes home.
Let's cross now to Susanna Carr and Tim Mellon, who are in the grounds of Windsor and can certainly hear the echo of what's going on and are starting to see this firsthand. Sue and Tim.
So much different seeing the royal procession going through the countryside here, and so different to London. In fact, it's actually more emotional, I find it, because you know she's coming home to where she loved.
And this is it. We're almost at the end of this long procession that's come all the way, really, from Balmoral 10 days ago, all the way here to Windsor Castle. Amazing to see the images too of the gunfire there.
Yes,
because we can hear it. We can hear it, but to see the image of there, to match it up is quite something. So that's happening out on the east lawn here at Windsor Castle by the King's Troop, the Royal Horse Artillery. We're going to hear the Sebastopol bell and the Curfew Tower bells tolling as well.
Interesting how they had the guns firing in Hyde Park when the Queen's body went to lie in state at Westminster Hall, and now we've got the 1-minute guns sounding from the Long Walk as well. The whole thing about the Windsor area is that it was so much in her heart. The Queen loved coming here. She could ride her horses here. She had all of her dogs here. It was something that became her home 100% of the time. And when COVID struck and she relocated here, it gave her the perfect excuse never to leave. And now she's coming back never to leave.
It is an absolutely enormous property here, isn't it? You only really get a scale from it. From that aerial picture there. Interestingly too, being in the town today, one of the public messages, they've got speakers set up all around the city, and periodically they play some public safety messages. One of the repeated messages today has been urging people not to throw flowers at the hearse as it passes by. But as we've seen in some of the images there of the hearse coming down the Long Walk, some have obviously done that anyway.
And the artillery now lining up at St George's Chapel, getting ready to receive the coffin as it arrives, but it's yet to move into the Long Walk for that huge, great reception that is going to be received there. So many people. When we saw the aerials, there are the clergy waiting to perform the service, and the crowds will be just so ecstatic to see her when it turns into the Long Walk itself, which is such a beautiful pathway into Windsor Castle, and the lovely entrance at the back end of the castle.
And just undeniably massive crowds. We've seen them gathering over 24 hours or so now. People have camped out for this particular vantage point, and why wouldn't you? It is just such a magnificent avenue that makes its way up to Windsor Castle.
And as we mentioned, this is a service for 800 people, including all of the staff, the household staff from Windsor Castle, people who had a very personal connection to the royal family. And they get their chance to farewell the Queen at this point. And Her Majesty's coffin will make its way down the long walk very, very soon. Look at those crowds, just spectacular. And lined with soldiers and policemen all the way as well.
It's been
Will
quite
it be
a buoyant
silent? Will it be
atmosphere.
silent?
I don't think so. We often wonder what the crowds are going to be like as the procession moves past. I kind of expected that it will be quiet. And look, some people in the crowd are quiet.
There is a little bit of noise.
There are enough people in there to make some noise as well. And I think the most common reaction that we've seen so far is clapping.
Usually when the hearse has passed by, out of respect, they're so wanting to show some sort of emotion and that they'll stay silent, and then when the hearse passes by they erupt into clapping. This has been such a different funeral, hasn't it? Because obviously we haven't had a royal funeral of this magnitude, but there's a lot more happiness around it. It's not the solemn affair that you would expect of a funeral, because this is a monarch who's lived 96 years, 96 wonderful years, been loved by her people and the people of the Commonwealth, and it's a life well lived.
And so cherished here in the town of Windsor as well, just walking around here in the last day or two. There's such an affection for her here. The souvenir shops have been absolutely rammed.
And of course the young royal family moving here just recently too. The new Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales and their children moving here. The Prince of Wales having gone to school at Eton here.
Which is not too far away from here, so yeah. Let's take you now to Sarah Greenhalgh, who is just in another part of the town here. She's seen those crowds building throughout the day, just outside the main entrance. Sarah, what are you seeing there?
Tim, just reflecting on the fact that this is a really significant moment. Princess Elizabeth first came to Windsor before her second birthday to visit her grandparents. She was last here on the 21st of July this year before she went off on her holidays at Balmoral, and now she's coming home for the last time. And even though, like you say, Sue, this is a celebration of 96 wonderful years of duty and service and such a rewarding life, it is sad to see this, that she is coming back one more time. And again, having been here for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral last year, very different. It was a ceremonial funeral. It happened during COVID, but seeing some of those images of the guards lining the steps there on the west steps of St George's Chapel, there are some parallels and similarities. We know that there are the same song being sung inside that committal service this afternoon. There is a reading that was read out at the Queen's grandparents' funerals and the funeral of her father back in 1952 as well. So there is still so much symbolism. There are 8 floral wreaths that have been placed at the podium inside St George's Chapel, upon which the Queen's coffin will be placed. And they are personal arrangements from family members, royal family members, that they have specifically chosen. Some of the other flowers inside, dahlias, lilies, roses, eucalyptus and greenery that has been cut from Home Park, which is a park inside the walls of this castle. It is moving seeing this, and also interesting to think what the people on that long walk are reflecting on as they see this coffin go past. Personally, I'm thinking about the last time that I was on the long walk, which again was for the Platinum Jubilee celebration in June. We saw Her Majesty come out into the quadrangle of Windsor Castle and light up the globe, which then led to this lighting up of various beacons across the Commonwealth. That's the last time that I was there, and there were huge crowds, but nothing like what we're seeing there today. So people might be reflecting of their fleeting encounters with Her Majesty out in Windsor Great Park, the times they've seen her in this town, the times that they saw her at the Windsor Horse Show or at Ascot or at the Polo. She was such an integral part of this community, as well as being their monarch. It is quite something, and there you go, those instruments of state that we've been talking about throughout the day. The imperial state crown, the orb, the sceptre, they are the last time that we will see, well, those people there gathered on the long walk will see those instruments of state as symbols of this monarch. As Victoria mentioned before, they will be passed on to King Charles. They will be symbols of a new reign once his coronation happens sometime next year. But these are remarkable scenes. Look at all of those people. And so different as well to what we saw in London. Buildings in the British capital here, there is so much greenery. It was such a hot, dry summer while the Queen was in residence at Balmoral, and then we had a week of rain a few weeks ago, and now everything is so green again, so back to looking like England should be looking for this really historic day.
Sarah, thank you. There will be a guard of honour, an official guard of honour, but this, in a sense, is the public's guard of honour, isn't it? As that procession slowly moves down the long walk, and we've talked, Sue, about some of the hugely important moments in royal history that have taken place here at Windsor. Compare that to when you were last here for Harry and Meghan's wedding. How would you contrast the atmospheres for this occasion?
How do you contrast a wedding with a funeral? But there was such joy and optimism at that wedding 4 years ago. Things have changed slightly. There have been a lot of controversy since then, but the whole royal family was extremely happy when that wedding happened, and there were a few trials during the week, but the reception was wonderful. The royal family are within the grounds of Windsor Castle now. The royal standard is flying, which shows that the monarch is in residence, which means King Charles is here. When King Charles, as he is now the monarch, is not here, the Union Jack flies, but the royal standard went up some time ago. The royal family came in ahead of the hearse. Obviously the hearse travelled at a much slower speed, so they're all waiting inside the grounds of Windsor Castle for the rest of the service this afternoon and their own private service, which will see the Queen laid to rest with her dearly beloved husband of so many years, the man who she first laid eyes on when she was 13, and decided that that was the man who would be the man for her life, and he was.
And the crowds, how would you contrast the size of the crowds? Was it on this scale for the wedding of Harry and Meghan?
The crowds were pretty strong, but of course it was only in Windsor, it wasn't anywhere else. And the crowds for the funeral of Her Majesty have been right from London, from Edinburgh, everywhere. So instead of being a Windsor-centric situation, this one has encompassed a lot of Britain, and so many people have managed to show their love for the Queen, who they've lost after all this time.
Sarah, there's been, just observing movement around the town, there's been a lot of people milling around. Obviously people have been jostling for a good position on the long walk, but just it feels like there's been people just sort of moving around town and just sort of happy to be a part of it. Are they a bit more still now that the focus is here at Windsor?
They certainly are, Tim. Yeah, we are just off the very centre of the town, obviously outside the walls of Windsor Castle, this incredible 1,000-year-old castle, and they have certainly become quite still. The mood has changed, as we've seen right throughout the past 10 days. When we get to these significant moments, you can sense it. You can sense that people realise the significance of this. We had the same when there was the 2-minute silence during the state funeral. People here did become still and silent. They know how significant this is, and we just saw before there a shot inside St George's Chapel, a 500-year-old chapel, so much royal history, weddings, funerals. Most of the funerals of British monarchs over the past 250 years, all of them actually, in fact, have happened inside this chapel. The Royal Vault, 200 years old, filled with 25 senior and minor royal family members. Of course, we know that is not the Queen's final resting place, but it will be this symbolic ceremonial moment when we see her coffin lowered into that vault very soon, in fact. So at 3:40, about 15 minutes away, that is when this procession is due to make it to the quadrangle, which is behind the castle walls. That is when we will see it link up with the members of the royal family, 3:53, there will be these minute guns fired, the bells will toll again, and then this committal service so that we see Prime Minister Liz Truss. So even though the majority of that congregation inside weren't at the state funeral, there is a little bit of, obviously, of crossover. The Governor-Generals, the Prime Ministers of the realms, including Australia, of course, and the royal family members as well. So we will see them link up with this procession and walk in. The Dean of Windsor is the one conducting this service, but there will also be prayers from church leaders from the other churches that Her Majesty went to over the years. She was a woman of great faith, and it became very obvious as well in her later years, in her addresses to the nation, in her recent Christmas speeches, that faith had become so important to her in her later years. There was lots of mention of God in many of those final addresses. This will be really special. I think it will feel a lot more personal than what we saw at Westminster Abbey. All those dignitaries, 2,000 people, 800 by comparison here. And again, I don't think people will be drawing parallels between what they see today and what they saw last year with the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, even though it was very, very different. 30 people only allowed at this time, and gosh, look at all those people there.